Well, good morning. And besides looking and saying, who's the old guy in the room? I look across this audience and think, I have ties older than many of you. So as Tom said, I've been doing this for a while. Here's my credentialing, why you should pay attention to this gray-haired guy up here when you're talking about this new revolutionary stuff. 19 years ago, background. I spent 33 years with Proctor & Gamble. 33 years, think about that. Who does that stuff? But 19 years ago, P&G had this series of data that said the number one driver of purchase intent in every category in which we competed, in every country in which we competed, was a recommendation from a friend. Turns out everybody has that data. So the CEO of P&G at the time, A.G. Lafley, looked at me and said, go figure this out. And I won't bore you with all the stories behind it. It was a pretty arduous couple of years, chasing down blind alley after blind alley, trying to figure out what is this recommendation for a friend thing, and how can you influence it? How can you drive it harder? And the beauty of the story is a serendipity. I'm on an airplane one night, and I'm kind of lamenting to my seatmate my job. And he looks at me and says, you know we have this all figured out, don't you? And I went, who are you? And it turns out he's a cognitive psychologist from the University of Texas by the name of Art Markman. Google him, follow him on Twitter. He has a wonderful little blog post. But Art said, this has been studied in academia since the 1930s. Except they just didn't call it advocacy. They didn't call it word of mouth. They called it diffusion. And it's very technical, but it started with the looking at how did the idea of hybrid corn spread throughout the farming community. And then he introduced us into the world of cognitive psychology, which is how the brain works and why do we talk to each other. And it was like scales falling from our eyes of all of a sudden we began to see things that we couldn't see before. And we began to run more and more experiments, and then we created a business around it. And what I'm going to do with you here today is share with you all the things that we learned so that we can go drive this. And I don't do this because I'm some altruistic individual. I do this because I passionately believe marketing is screwed up. And we are all marketers in this room, and we have a service we need to go deliver to our consumers. And the way we're delivering most marketing to the consumers is a disservice. And so I am passionate about trying to go drive this, and hence the reason I talk about this. I retired from P&G 8 years ago. Yes, I am really old. And I joined Boston Consulting as a senior advisor. The requirement to be a senior advisor is you have to have gray hair. I qualified. And so what I then have been able to do now is take what we learned at Proctor and bring it to BCG and bring it into a new practice area for BCG. And now that's given me exposure all around the world to all sorts of different sectors, from financial services to consumer products to automotive to business, and apply these principles over and over again. And as Tom said, universally, this is the single most efficient dollar you can spend in marketing. This idea of how do you go activate word of mouth. Now, it's time for me to reveal things. We're going to get to know each other because I'm going to ask you guys to participate here in just a moment. I'm lazy. I have been lazy my entire life. I can give you my wife's phone number. She'll tell you this. So as much marketing as I've been doing my entire life, I'm always searching for the easy answer. Years ago, now we'll really test your guys' age. Years ago, Second Life came out. Does anybody remember Second Life? And so the easy answer was, as brands, all we need to do is create digital avatars that will exist in Second Life, and we'll have a way to communicate with consumers. This was going to be the solution. It was all over Ad Age. How many of you have digital avatars on Second Life? Oh, right. It didn't work. It didn't work. So the truth is there was no easy answer. I've never seen anything that's, quote, the easy answer. But I've got something that's awful close. And the answer to that is advocacy. If you increase your advocacy on your business, you increase your business. It is literally as simple as that. If you increase advocacy, you grow your business. I will show you hard data on that. I'm going to ask you to just accept that for the time being. Later in this talk, we'll get into the real hard data. But this has a 94% correlation to growth. 94%. And yet most brands sit around and go, yeah, I get that, but I don't know what to go do about it. And so what we're going to go explore here today is how do we go do this? How do we go activate advocacy inside of our businesses? But before we get there, I want you guys to talk. I want you to tell me an advocacy story. Tell me a story where somebody advocated to you a brand or a service, not your own business. I don't want to hear about your own business, but something outside of your business. Tell me a story where either you advocated or somebody advocated for you. And remember, Tom said you have to participate. Yes, right here.
Back in the day, I had photography equipment that I had to protect and keep safe, and my company, and I went out there and one was fine. I had another photographer friend who says, "You've got to get a Pelican. Pelican cases are the thing to have." And so I bought a Pelican case and put all this camera equipment in it, and it was great and everything like that. But then I just realized how great that brand was, and so now all my luggage, all my sunglass carriers, all my backpacks, everything I got is Pelican, just because it protects everything that I got. And for travel, like I travel a lot, it's a perfect brand to have. So.
Great story. Tell me a couple of things. Who told you that?
One of my lifelong trusted photography friends.
Okay. And what do you recall what he said to you?
He said, "I have a Pelican case over there. It lasts forever. It has stickers from all around the world, and he goes, my Canon in there.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. It's a great story there. Tell me another one. Yes, sir.
I think I'm Justin, actually, from Climb next to me. When I was starting snowmobile several years ago, seriously, I had just basic gear, wasn't really just waterproof stuff out there. And I'm with a buddy who was like, dude, why are you doing that? We're in hot water, we're getting hot, we're high marking, we're doing all these things. He's like, you need some of this Climb stuff. It basically just came out. I thought I was loud enough. At least my wife says I am. So he took me down, and then they had some deal with the lodge we were staying at, and I decked myself entirely out in it, and I've never gone back. And it's totally outside of my industry, but it ended up being perfect for the occasion, what I needed.
Who's this buddy?
He was now one of my best friend's husbands, and
Okay.
Just a riding buddy, basically, good friend.
Okay. All right. And same thing. Tell me again, what was it he said to you?
Well, he said, "Why do you look like an effing schlub?" was the first thing he said to me.
It was the second thing out of my mouth.
Yeah. But the second was, "You're sweating, you're dying, you can't keep up with us. You need something that's going to perform better. And here's what I'm using. It's awesome. It just came out, et cetera, et cetera."
Great. Okay. Give me one more story. Somebody give me one more story. Either where you advocated. Give me a story where you advocated to somebody. Bueller.
Yeah, I'll do it. So a few years ago, I got the influencer program at a group called Prana, a company called Prana. And I've been wearing their clothes, and probably every quarter I buy a set of new clothes. And my brother-in-law asked me a couple months ago, he's like, what are your clothes? I've been noticing they're different. And it was funny because I remember just going, oh, you've got to buy these. Best pants you'll ever buy. They 4-way stretch. Best shirt you'll ever buy. And in the last 2 months, I think he's bought about 20 pieces. And he keeps coming back to me. He's like, those are the best pants. Those are the best shorts. And so we're just slowly changing over his wardrobe as well. But I was happy to hook him up because I also get a discount.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Now, I started this by saying I'm lazy. And I really mean that. So I want you guys to do the work now. We heard three stories. We heard a clothing line, we heard a snowmobiling line, and we heard a photography protection luggage line. What was the commonality in those three stories? Say it again.
All recommendations by friends and family.
All recommendations by friends and family. Yep, that's one. What's the root of friends and family? That's the operative word, trust. So unless trust exists, word of mouth and advocacy doesn't exist. So they are 100% correlated. If you create advocacy with no trust, it goes nowhere. Okay? So you've identified the first critical factor, this word of trust and how we go build trust. And that's our responsibility as marketers. That's our responsibility as marketers to go build trust. Okay, what's the second commonality?
They all have a benefit, like a clear feature advantage, it seemed like. So every person educated them on, hey, trust me, it's a lot better, it's going to be more durable, it's going to keep your gears clean, or whatever.
You are touching on it, right behind you. A story. Okay? What does Pelican advertising marketing look like? Do you know? Have you ever seen any?
No, I actually haven't seen it because I just
Okay. How about for the snowmobile line? Have you ever seen any marketing for them? Do you know what they say? How about for your clothing? How about for your clothing line? Do you know what they say?
Clothing line, they tell a lot of stories of the product, where it's being used. So once a week, I get an email.
Okay. Well, the second commonality that exists in advocacy is that the message the advocate delivers is always different than the marketing message. 100% of the time. It's always different. And this is the struggle we have as marketers. We're like, yes, we believe deeply in advocacy. I really want to. And what I want the consumer to advocate is my advertising tagline, because I have this agency that I've just spent a lot of money on. And they created this great tagline, and I want them to repeat it as if we were robots. And yet the stories we tell each other, never do we mimic the advertising tagline. There's something different. It's either personal, or it's disruptive, or it's a unique benefit. So as you think through these stories, those 2 points are the ones I want you to constantly be thinking about. Trust, and I'm going to use the word disruptive. Trust and disruption are the whole secrets to it. As you think about Expert Voice and the wonderful work these guys are doing, by the way, I don't have any relationship other than getting to know Tom a little, so I'm not here to sell Expert Voice in any way, shape, or form. But as you think about it, I really want to examine the second part of that, this idea of disruption and what it is. So those are the 2 themes that I want you to kind of remember, all right? So here's the critical questions, you who are running brands today, that you didn't have to ask 20 years ago. When I was doing marketing for consumer products for Tide and Pampers and Crest and Head & Shoulders, these big, huge, massive brands, we never asked these questions. But who is talking about you today? What are they saying? And how do you participate in that conversation? These are the new strategic marketing questions that have to be at the forefront of your annual marketing plan. As you think about it, we must know who's talking about our brands and what they're saying, and how do I participate in that discussion? Because if I am, I'm going to go drive those recommendations. So advocacy, this concept of advocacy, wins a new moment of truth. Who's ever heard the expression moments of truth? So this moment of truth, just to give you the origin came from the same CEO who asked me to go do this work at P&G, A.G. Lafley, the most brilliant CEO I've ever worked with. And A.G. identified 2 moments of truth. He said, we have to win these 2 moments of truth or we fail. The first moment of truth is when the consumer stood at the store shelf and she picked, and I say she here because most P&G products are bought by women, and she picked our brand versus a competitor's brand at the store shelf. And if we didn't win that in store, we're going to fail. And then the second moment of truth is then when she took the product home, we had to win at the usage experience. So when you used Pampers, the brand delivered from a usage experience on the brand promise. And if you didn't win those 2 moments of truth, you had a failing business. What advocacy has identified for us is there's a third moment of truth. And the third moment of truth is you have to win the pre-sale engagement. So when the consumer goes to the store, he or she is already inclined because of a recommendation to purchase that product. When you go to go purchase in an e-commerce environment, you've already are predisposed to select this brand because you've won the pre-selection process. So at companies like P&G, we built entire organizations around the first and second moment of truth, and which is always a really strange business card. Hi, I'm the director of the first moment of truth. But that was legitimately a title. And now there is work that's being done on the zero moment of truth. So this identifies a new marketing opportunity for us. And so I'd argue for you that this is a pretty good model as you think about your marketing organizations in all of your businesses, no matter how big or small you are, as you think about how do I get my marketing efforts focused against these three areas, winning these three areas, these three moments of truth. All right, so what is advocacy marketing? Advocacy marketing is using the power of independent advocates, independent people, people who are not directly connected with your brand, to advocate for you. And it's done this by establishing trusts and relationship between the advocate and the people they're talking to. That doesn't sound like anything taught in a marketing book that I've ever read, right? So this is new work. This is truly new work. And we have to look and say, how does this differ from advertising? And advertising, if you think about it, is nothing but a brand standing up and advocating on its own behalf. So I stand up and say, here's who I am, here's what I stand for, and here's why you should believe me. But what's missing there? Trust. What's missing there is trust. And it's really being amplified at an extraordinary level. The lack of trust is being amplified at an extraordinary level in the last 10 years. Why? What's changed? Say more about that. Who said transparency?
Yeah, like there's so much more information out there, and people without a voice and previously have a voice on social media, they can get caught up. And so there's so much more transparency. Brands can't hide behind the 1 or 5,000 customers that they don't properly serve.
But shouldn't transparency enhance trust?
No, because you're finding out stories you didn't know existed.
And say more. What did you just say here?
So, sorry. One of the issues they run into is when you're finding out athletes or advocates are getting paid. So before, when Wheaties came out and it was Michael Jordan, it was this big, awesome thing that you came up and this athlete actually eats this stuff. And then you find out it's all endorsement deals. It's Wayne's World going through and telling people, with ad placement with Bayer and all that other stuff. So like it's just somebody getting paid. They don't actually believe in it. They believe in the money behind it.
Right. So transparency has been transparency has diminished trust because there's so much more information out there available. And part of the information the consumer is getting is how much we as marketers have played around with their brains for years, right? And so the trust level is diminished. And so this is new work we have to go do. So who's the most trusted brand today in your world? Who's a brand that you instinctively say, I trust? Yes, sir. Apple. Tell me why.
Everything works. Simply, just works.
And yet they're a 20% premium to any other product in the marketplace.
Yeah. Yeah, the experience is I'd say the experience is intuitive, it's seamless, it's super easy to pick up. When I think you and I were talking about this last night, but when your 6-year-old relative can figure it out in 2 minutes, and your 3-year-old can learn it within 2 minutes, that's impressive. So they took behaviors that were just instinctive, to your point, on swiping. That to me is just impressive. And they built an ecosystem that they have millions of developers that want to contribute to this platform that just makes it easier to live your life. You're more efficient. You not just get more things done, but you do things better, and you're smarter, and you're better with your time.
So my bet is how that manifests itself for you is when Apple introduces a new product, you instinctively trust them, and you're more likely to go purchase that new product.
Yeah.
And think about that for your business. Think about how much less marketing I have to spend because I have that instinctive trust. Give me another example of a brand you really trust. Way back
I'd like
here.
to add to that real quick. Just about Apple in general is I remember my going to art school and getting my first iMac and thinking the same thing. It was like, man, this computer just works. And getting iPhones and becoming what would be a prototypical fanboy of Apple. I mean, literally anything they ever made, I was like, I gotta have it. And it's weird. Just in maybe the last year, I've been looking at cutting the cord and getting rid of cable and doing my own thing. And so, of course, Apple TV was the thing to get, right? So I spent, $200 on this Apple TV, and somebody came to me and they're like, man, why don't you get in this Amazon TV? First of all, it's like a quarter of the amount, has everything you need it. And I tell you, I was like, I resisted it. And my wife, because we have like 6 TVs in the house, and she's like, man, we can't put $200 on each TV. And so I hunkered down. There was a sale. And I bought one, and I'm telling you, it was like it's a slippery slope, because I got this Amazon TV, and I'm like, wow, it really does do everything I need it to do, and it really works, and it's really intuitive. I can just talk to not Siri, who never gives me the right answer, but this other thing that does give me the right answer. And I tell you, this little bit of me, a fanboy, a number one fanboy that would be buying all this stuff, is now starting to question other things, like in this ecosystem that I've built my career around. And I worry about the Apple side of this. And even though that they just crossed over into $1 trillion, to take somebody from me who's had 25 years of brand advocacy to them and have just even that little bit of a sliver, that's worrisome if I was in a massive brand like that.
What's the big learning here? The big learning here is how quickly trust can get eroded, how really quickly trust gets eroded. I would love to see if every company had a chief trust officer that's sitting there and they're just thinking about, how do I instill that trust? Because it is exactly that story of how quickly a brand can erode their trust just because they made a mistake. They overpriced a product, they overpromised and underdelivered, and trust can get eroded just that fast. Give me one more story, either of a brand you really, really trust, or a brand you say, I wouldn't trust these people as far as I could throw them.
I love Subaru.
Tell me why.
Everybody laughs. So, I'm passionate for their marketing and the do-good side of their business, but the car is one of the best things I've ever owned, and I've had a few different cars now, and that's what I trust. Plus, I had several other people tell me how much they loved their cars, and you see the little badges. This is my 8th Subaru. Like, what other car manufacturer can top that?
So what kind of Subaru do you have?
I have an Impreza.
And can you tell me what the size engine's in there?
Nope.
What's the torque that comes?
Not enough to haul my trailer. But
So the story of Subaru and the story of Apple, there's another interesting connection there, where trust, what you're hearing, is emotion. Now, as marketers, we're trained that our benefit is what leads. Here's the product benefit I have, but listen to how people are talking about brands they love. I'm connected to the brand emotionally, not just on product. Now, the product has to be there too. I'm not arguing you can only do emotional stuff. But if you just do product stuff, my snowmobiling clothing keeps me warmer and it just has a functional benefit to it, and that's it, you'll never build that level of trust that we're talking about. Yes?
I see a problem these days.
Can you just hang on just 1 second?
I see a problem with the trust in them picking sides politically. Like, I'm a huge Sage fly fishing fan. And then I saw him start to post a lot of political stuff on the pages I'm following on Facebook and stuff. And I've almost thought, okay, my next rod's not going to be a Sage. It's going to be, another rod company. Because, I don't know, it drives me nuts. We hear enough of political stuff everywhere. And we just want, when it's like my fly fishing, I just want to fly fish. I don't want to know their opinion politically. I really don't care. And they start shoving it down my throat. I'm like, okay, I've lost trust. I don't know. It's just maybe that's the emotional side, but
Who else has
I see
the same
that going
reaction?
on.
What's the learning here? What's the learning that comes out of this?
Be apolitical. Sorry, my opinion. I'm right there. I'm actually in the fly fishing industry, and I have heard that from a lot of different places. And I'm honestly anti-Apple in a lot of ways. I prefer Google. I prefer Microsoft because I can actually modify things. I'm not stuck in a box, as it were. And now that they've got it to a play, and I've seen it where they shut things down and do things based politically that I don't necessarily agree with. And so I've lost trust in certain companies as a result of that. And so I don't want to say keep your nose out of it. There's like Subaru's great. You know, they give money from the sales to, was it animals as well as, I mean, it's wonderful. And those are great kind of apolitical things. And no one's going to say, I hate puppies. But when they, you know, some of the Sage stuff they're doing, it's just, in this day and age, we're talking about the social media and how everybody has a voice. Now, if you say the wrong thing, you've got a mob coming after you from one side or the other. It doesn't matter which one it is. And then that's kind of the quagmire, you know, we try to avoid in our social stuff. And we'll see responses. I'm sure everybody here does. Like, hey, what do you guys think about this? Or, you know, why aren't you talking about that? And we've got a diverse group of people that work with different views, and we just try to keep it right in the middle and just not even touch it.
I think the big learning on this, and this is a new phenomena, really over the last 10 years, the political aspect of it is know your place. Know your place as a brand. You know, where do you exist in the consumer's life? And I would submit there are very few brands that have the right to play in political space with a brand, with a consumer. That's not your place with them. You know, I'm in solving a family's health issue. I'm into recreation. I don't have the right to play. Know where you have the right to play to be able to have a point of view on that. And if you don't have that right, stay the hell out of it, because it's going to do this. Yes?
To kind of add to that, I think that we're a small company with an emphasis on eco-minded aspects of apparel and accessory development. And Patagonia is someone we've always looked up to. It's somebody that, from a young brand, what they're doing, we feel like is at the forefront of making an impact on a toxic industry. But then over the last couple of years, it's kind of like the political aspect came into play, and everyone had to make a decision of, do you like this brand or not? And it came down to what they were advocating politically, right? So for me, they'd lost me, and I never really owned Patagonia products, but they had kind of lost me with their marketing. But then this summer, I had a chance to go over and visit one of their factories that they work with, and they're putting $10 million into this dye machine that won't use water. And instead of taking it and patenting it and making it so nobody else can use it, they're actually going to use it for 1 year and then open it up for the whole industry to use it. And that's how Patagonia has operated with all of their eco-minded initiatives that they've worked on and put money into. So when you get down to the core base of the company, that reinstilled my trust in what Patagonia has been doing from the beginning. But the last couple of years, whoever's in their marketing department, for I think the general consumer, they've got to win through that, and they've got this group of people that are diehard fans. But from the brand owner perspectives and the industry kind of people that were watching this brand, we kind of knew that wasn't really Patagonia. What they stand for is more as an industry pushing us forward and working towards something that's positive and working towards a positive growth instead of fighting against something that's negative.
So I will show you some data here in a few moments that social responsibility and what you do is an advocatable point of view, but you have to be very careful about it. It must be connected to the brand. The story I tell all the time is Kraft macaroni and cheese, right? Could you get a more basic US, we've all had it as a child growing up, and they connected their brand to the Susan B. Komen breast cancer. Now, please tell me what the hell macaroni and cheese and breast cancer have in common. And it didn't do anything for the brand. And so when Patagonia does eco production and gives that away, that's a connection to the brand. Social responsibility must be connected to your brand equity if it's going to be worth anything to you. So that first requires you to know what your brand equity is, and then you've got to connect your brand equity and your social responsibility together. And if you do that, that's an advocatable position. That is something people will talk about. There's not a human being in the world that talked about Kraft macaroni and cheese and breast cancer. Not at all. So it's not that breast cancer is not a very worthwhile thing to be contributing money to, but it didn't do anything to build the brand. So as you think about these advocatable positions, one last thing and then I've got to move on.
So in terms, you mentioned features and benefits, and I find it very hard to get emotionally connected to features and benefits. But when you talk about a why of a brand or the cause, which is what you would advocate for as the company, it's very, that emotional connection is available and much easier to connect to.
And thank you for saying that, because you are exactly right. This idea of purpose-driven marketing is a very hot topic right now, but it is this emotional connection to a brand is so much deeper than just feature and benefits. It's the reason why you feel it in a company. It's the reason why the people get up to go to work in the morning, not to go produce some product. I can tell you, because I spent 33 years at that company, the people who work on Pampers do not get up in the morning to go make a dryer diaper, but they get up in the morning and come to work because they're passionate about making babies healthier around the world. And that's a different purpose, and you feel it in a company that does that, and your brands have that capability. And when you can access that to the consumer, it becomes, again, an advocatable position. It's something that consumers will talk about. All right, so here's some data, and why advocacy now? Look at this data. This is done off of a consumer research survey. Who here does consumer research? Done any statistical? This is 227,000 respondents. The statistical significance of this is massive. 227,000. 50% of all are consulted with family and friends first, before they make a purchase. 39% of consumers go to your websites. But look at this one. How many people are hearing about thank you. Are we active now? Okay. How many of you hear about social influencers and these companies that'll sell you access to social influencers? And look what the data tells us. The consumer just ignores them. The classic social influencer, and I get so tired of seeing these people who are essentially selling their souls. If you'll just give me a bunch of free product, I'll advocate for you. And the consumer's telling you, I actually don't. It doesn't do anything for me, because to somebody's point earlier, they know they're being paid. They know they're being compensated. And that ruins trust. Yes, sir. This is across like 19 different industries. And across many, many different countries. So this is a global phenomena. But a 4 to 5x factor, consulting family and friends. And so this idea of getting access into that community so that we can go drive things, this is the hard data that supports it. And this is the logic of advocacy, the business logic of advocacy. We know from our research at BCG that there are 6 standard levers of advocacy that always exist. Then there are, by category, there are other levers. But these 6 always exist irrespective of category. Value for money, superior functional technical, customer service, does things or things I can relate, does things for me or I can relate to it, social responsibility, and emotional identification with the brand. Those are the 6 levers of advocacy. So as you think about your advocacy messaging, they need to at least touch one of those 6. If I can work that lever, it increases client recommendations, and client recommendations drive sales. So the logic of advocacy is extremely simple, but it's very different than the traditional purchase funnel idea that we all grew up learning. So this should be some new learning for you on these 6 levers. We'll dive into them deeper. So now let's get to the really fun part. What's the model of advocacy? So this is the research that we did at P&G that I spent a decade on. And if you only remember one slide of anything I say here today, it's this slide. Advocacy is a mathematical formula. It is relationship times disrupted experience equals advocacy. Relationship times disrupted experience. And you can measure both sides of that. So let me illustrate that for you. I have a friend He's not my best friend in the world, right? But on a trust level, by the way, substitute the word trust for relationship here. They're one and the same in this model. On a trust level, on a scale of 1 to 100, he's a 50, right? Pretty good friend, but not, not my wife. But if what he tells me is not interesting, not surprising, not disruptive, you get 0 advocacy. Flip the model the other way. If I tell you the most surprising, disruptive thing in the world, and I don't know who you are, or I don't trust you, you also get 0 advocacy. So this says, as marketers, we have to pull 2 new levers. We must pull a trust lever, and we must pull a disruption lever. If you don't do both, you get no advocacy. So when you spend all your time simply working on the messaging part and nothing on the trust, it fails. Or if you spend all your time trying to go find your advocates, but don't do anything on helping them find new messaging that is interesting to their social network, not interesting to you, but interesting to their social network, you'll also get no advocacy. This is the core of the model. And we're going to spend the next couple of minutes ripping this thing apart. Okay? You guys following me? Because we're going to go for a ride here, which is a lot of fun. Years of research, what we've learned is there is a new question you have to ask. It's a new segmentation. So in many companies, you have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of consumers. And you cannot have a relationship, to go back to this model, to go to the left side, that's what we're talking about first. I cannot have a relationship with all of them. You don't have enough resources to go do that. Human, financial, whatever. So you must choose who you're going to have a relationship. And how do we choose who that is? Well, from all of the research we've done, is we have figured out that there's a critical 2%. That you need 2%, a relationship with 2% of your target market's base in order to influence the total target market. Let me say that again. If I'm going to influence 100%, I can influence 100% by having a significant relationship with 2%. And this has been studied in many, many different sciences. From virology, the study of how diseases spread, to social network analysis, population dynamics, and one of my favorite days I've had in my career is I brought in the world's leading expert on forest fires into P&G. And he sat down and looked and said, I don't know a thing about soap or Pampers. And I went, no, that's not what we want to learn about. We want to learn about forest fires. Because what's a forest fire? It's the ignition of an idea that spreads to a larger society. And guess what it proved? The critical mass necessary to light a forest fire was 2%. So this is something we did at P&G a lot. We'd go to the physical sciences to see if we could apply it to the social sciences. And this 2% number holds true. So the challenge for you is find your 2%. Who's the 2% that's going to influence the 100%? By the way, the logic of this, all of us are one social network away from a super connector. So a super connector is, most of us connect statistically with between 9 and 11 people. There's a bunch of psychology about it. We have 9 to 11 people that we have really close relationships with. And then there are people who are super connectors that connect with hundreds of people. That's just their personality. And we're all one social network away. So the idea of the 2% is the 2% gives you enough access points in where if the messaging is right, it connects to a super connector, and then the message spreads throughout the larger society. That's how germs spread. That's how it works in virology too. So where do we find the 2%? We know that you find your 2% in one of 6 categories, and they're not mutually exclusive, so you can find your 2% in many of them. The first is aspirational endorser. Think of this as celebrity. Now, I don't know all of your businesses. I know in the kind of businesses that I ran, aspirational endorsers had little influence. If Britney Spears said she loved Pantene shampoo, it didn't tend to drive a lot of sales. But in some categories, it's really important. In health, in beauty and entertainment, it's a massive influence. So you have to know your category here. But aspirational endorsers is one place to go look. The second is credentialed expert. This is somebody who's carrying a badge that says, I know what I'm talking about, and you should pay attention to me. You see this a lot in consumer electronics. You see this a lot in automotive. I would argue ExpertVoice plays in this space a lot. They don't actually talk about it that way, but I would argue that this is how ExpertVoice is successful in the marketplace. Current clients, current customers. Psychologists teach us that the #1 moment of advocacy is when you first try a brand, when you try it for the first time. You are psychologically predisposed to want to go talk about it. And so you look at a brand and say, so tell me what you're doing to help your consumer talk about the brand when they just tried it for the first time. And most brands give you this blank stare. I've never thought about it. So current customers are a fantastic place to get access to your 2%. Quick sidelight story I'll tell you about. Unfortunately, I didn't bring it with me, but I bought an Audi. And anybody who's bought a new car, Subaru, Audi, we all love to talk about our new cars because you just spent a lot of money. And so we want to tell our friends about that because we want to be, it's called cognitive dissonance, is the psychological term for it. We're trying to reassure ourselves that we have made a smart decision, and we do that by talking about it. But all of our friends get tired of hearing about our new car after about a week. So the Audi people were brilliant. 3 months after, they send me this book saying, hope you're enjoying the car. Here's some things you might not know. And it's things like the color black on your car is actually 7 different colors of black. Or the way we get the certain shine in the car is buffed with ostrich feathers. What Audi's done is given me a new reason to talk about my car. I can assure you all of my golfing buddies heard about ostrich feathers. It's a brilliant move by Audi to say, I'm using my current customer base to go create access to the 2%. Mavens are another area. Mavens are people who have really deep category expertise, but not much social breadth. So think of video gamers, right? They have really deep expertise in the category of social, but they have 4 friends. That's really stereotyping. But they're all in a basement. The opposite of this is connectors. Connectors are people who have extremely broad social networks and very little specific category expertise. We all know these people. They talk about everything. Each one of them are a different reason to access the 2%. They exist in there. And the final area is communities. And this is the most fertile playground in marketing today. And when I say communities, I don't mean physical communities, I mean digital communities. They're communities where your brand is being talked about today and being advocated for, and you don't know about it. And you don't know about it at all. The community of soccer moms, the conversations that go on at the field when their kids are playing soccer is amazing, the subject matter that goes on. And so we learned from a whole bunch of research. It's everything from financial services to education to shampoo to outdoor recreations to vacations. Who here's a soccer mom? Who has kids that, am I lying here? I mean, it is an amazing community where your brand's being talked about. So the responsibility for you to go search for your 2% is to identify those communities where your brands are being talked about. And they're not, and don't just go to the logical ones. So if I'm in fly fishing, there are fly fishing communities, right? That's easy to think about. But there are other communities where your brand's being talked about and you don't know about it yet. And so that, if you do that, that's how you go find this critical 2%. What are some of the ideas you guys have for finding your 2%? So you think about these 6 categories. Give me an idea how you'd find somebody who's part of the 2%.
Reddit.
Say more.
So we look at Reddit a lot, which can be a black hole of good and bad, positive and negative, but it's people actively talking about your products, your services, what they love, what they hate, and you get honest opinions right then and there.
Do you participate?
I don't, but we have some people in our office that do. I'm a stalker. I'll just read it all. I do a lot of forum hunting for what I do, so.
Okay, we're going to talk about that in a little bit, about the difference between observing and participating, because it's a driver of trust. Any other ideas? Yes.
I think reviews is a good way too. A lot of times we'll get reviewers that use our product and they say how they used our product, and it's a way that we never would have even imagined. One thing we do is like a messenger bag, and it's funny, like a lot of people use them for diaper bags, and it's like the furthest thing away from what our brand is and what we build the bags for. But there's this weird community of people that use them as diaper bags. So listening to your reviews and how people are using your products.
I agree with everything you said except the word weird. Because their money's just as green as the other people too. But that's a great example. Review sites, the rate and review sites are a fantastic place to go look for. One more example.
I just want to say that I think this is important because as someone who works for ExpertVoice, who works with brands that are onboarding, you'll have a brand that's coming in the climbing category, let's say, or the river category, and they think, I just want to target river experts. I just want to target climbing people. And so the challenge for us, or the education for us, becomes how do we help these brands understand that it's not just those people that are talking about your brands. It is the soccer moms that are talking about your brands, and it is the wider audience that you need to be targeting where you can get that 2% influx.
So this is a larger question that I hope we discuss over lunch and during breaks and stuff. It's who runs advocacy in your companies? How do people like ExpertVoice access the right people? Are we organized the right way to tap into advocacy so those questions can be answered and asked? I guess it goes for asked and answered, sorry. But this conversation is a conversation that needs to take place, because you're right. We've got to educate people that this is the reality. This is how consumers actually really are in the marketplace. You need to break out of your old marketing world mindset of, oh, it's only climbers. There are other people here talking about it. And so that's data and a lot of other things, but we also have to get access to the right people. So there are going to be 3 new areas of work that I'm going to identify for you. This very first, yes, sir.
Sorry, go back one slide. Just to clarify, are these subcategories for these 2%, or the 2% is ignition for everyone, and the way you have it listed on your slide, the 2% could be one person influences everything, or do you need that person that communities, and you need the maven, and you need that?
No, view these as areas to go search for your 2%. So they're not mutually exclusive. There might be part of your 2% is in a community. The other part might be a current customer, but it's the 2% is the critical number. These are areas to go search. And they can cross over. Sorry, I wasn't clear on that. Okay, I'm going to identify 3 brand new areas of work. This very first area is a new segmentation model, which is you have to identify who your 2% is, right? Now, remember my friend who was a 50, right? If I could increase our trust level from a 50 to a 75, statistically, I'd get 50% more advocacy. So that then causes us to ask the question, well, how do we increase trust level? And lo and behold, I dive back into academia and we go look at the word trust, and the amount of research on the word trust could literally fill up this hotel. And I've summarized it on one PowerPoint slide. You're welcome. This is a very simple model of trust, but it's a good operational model. 90% of the relationships we have in life are transactional. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a very simple process. It means I give you something, you give me something back in return. What that typically looks like is I give you a product or service, you give me money. There's nothing wrong with that. You can drive advocacy off of transactional relationships. However, for the 2%, we need to move them up the scale to what's called a neighborly relationship, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's how you treat your friends and neighbors. So has anyone ever had an experience, who has kids? Lots of you guys. So you ever had the experience of a friend comes to you and says, hey, could you do me a favor? Could you pick up Johnny from after school when you're picking up your kids? Could I borrow something from you? Could you do me a favor? And what do you say? Sure. Yes. Here's what you don't do. You don't write it down. You don't have something next to your phone that says, I picked up Sally's kid from school. Unless, of course, you're a marketer. And then not only do we write it down, we threaten the consumer with the information. The classic story on this one, like many of you, travel a lot. I'm a member of every loyalty program in the world, which sort of begs the question, am I loyal at all? But I checked into this hotel chain late at night, get to the front desk. The front desk person looks and says, oh, Mr. Knox, we saw that you used to be a gold member. You didn't stay enough nights with us. So we've downgraded you from your upgrade because you're only a silver member. So what she did is she took a neighborly-like relationship and drove it down to transactional because she was following the rules. Imagine how that conversation would have been different if she had said, oh, Mr. Knox, we've missed you. We saw you used to spend a lot of nights with us. You're not spending as many nights. I hope it's because you're not traveling as much. But we'd like you to stand. We'll keep this upgrade. We just want to let you know that you're on the cusp now. Right? I would have advocated that. And instead, what we do, our business processes tend to drive us from neighborly relationships down to transactional relationships. And what I'm begging you to do is when you find your 2%, treat them differently. And every bone in your body screams, no, I treat all my consumers the same, and I say BS. Your 2% is worth so much to you, you should treat them differently. And guess what? The consumer doesn't care. They don't care. They understand that some people are more valuable than others and that you treat them differently. And the way you treat them differently is to treat them in a neighborly relationship. By the way, you'll see at the top of this pyramid is the word love. And brands love to say, I want to get to love. No, you don't. Love is reserved for a very, very, very small number of people in our lives. And it is high risk, high reward stuff. And brands do not play there, no matter what Kevin Roberts, formerly of Saatchi & Saatchi, used to say when we create love marks. No, Kevin, we don't. In relationships, we're just trying to drive to neighborly. So then that asks the question, so how do you do that? That's great, Steve. You've told us this. How do we do it? Well, it turns out there are two proven ways to drive trust and relationships in how we do it in our everyday lives. The first is called reciprocal altruism, which is a very fancy term for something you do every day of your life. Reciprocal altruism simply means I give to you and I expect nothing in return. And the reciprocal part then is you give to me and you expect nothing in return, and we build trust. Have you opened up a door for somebody recently? That's an act of reciprocal altruism. You didn't open up that door for that person because you wanted something in return. It was just a gift I gave to you, right? You do this every day of your life, and that's how you build human relationships. The second is a virtuous cycle called interact, listen, and respond, where you interact with an individual, you listen to what they have to say, and then you respond, which then creates more interaction, more listening, more response. It's a virtuous cycle. Unless, of course, you're a marketer. In which case, we interact with our consumers. If we're really sophisticated, we put in some digital listening devices, but we never say anything back. How long would you stay in a relationship if no one ever said anything back to you, if you were just a stalker? You wouldn't. And so the new work we have to do is learn how to go interact, listen, and respond back to the consumer with this 2%. We're not asking you to do this to everybody, but with the 2%, how do you create a trusting relationship? And you must do it this way. And this is all we're doing, is extracting out what we do in human relationships into a business relationship. And I know at this point you're all going, aw, listen to Steve, the tree hugger. This actually works. Let me give you a couple of real life examples. Maybe my favorite. Anybody here from the South? Been to Chick-fil-A before? It's a fast food joint, right? I've never, in 44 years of doing consumer research, have I ever experienced a brand that the consumer has more personalized. It's my Chick-fil-A. So I go down to go visit them and find out, what are you doing that evokes this level of passion in the consumer? And this is one example. And this is reciprocal altruism at work. They, once a year, they take their 2%, which happens to be males with young children, and they close down their stores and they invite dads to bring their daughter on a date night. So it's daddy-daughter date night. If you've been to a Chick-fil-A, you've never seen white tablecloths. But they put a white tablecloth, they put a rose on it, and then in my favorite piece of consumer insight ever, they put a card on the table with questions to ask your daughter, because they know we males are incapable of having a conversation without prompts. Is that beautiful or what? And then they take a digital photograph of you and your daughter on date night. This costs them nothing. Costs them nothing. The consumer has paid for the food here. But what they've done is give them a gift. What's the gift they've given them? Experience. They've given a gift of experience. So as we think about reciprocal altruism and the giving part of it, reciprocal altruism, please don't think of these as physical gifts. And you and I had this conversation about your nephews last night, and you were struggling like, this generation, these young kids, what do you get them for gifts? And I was going to say to you, I said, listen to my part of my presentation, and this is what it is. There are two things that stay in our memory banks. If I said to you, what did you get for Christmas last year? I'd volunteer that most of us would struggle to go, oh, yeah, I think I got, maybe, I don't remember. Gifts, physical gifts, do not stay in our memory banks. Gifts of experience stay in our memory banks for a very, very long time. So as you think about gifts, a gift of an experience, a gift of information. Give me a piece of information that nobody else knows. So imagine you have access to this 2%, and all of you guys run these great brands, and you have information on the category or on the brand that nobody else knows. Give it to the 2%. It's a gift. It enhances them in their social network. Give them a gift of experience, give them a gift of information, and the most valuable gift? What's the most valuable gift you can give somebody? Who said that? Time. It's the thing we're shortest on in life. And depending on who your target market is, if it's moms, you give mom 10 minutes extra in her day, she'll love you forever. So as we think about building trust with this 2%, do this act. This comes from my old company. Fantastic story here. P&G was a phenomenal company. It's having a hiccup right now. I think it will come back. But P&G gets a lot of credits for a lot of things, a lot of really smart people working there. I wish I could tell you this was a lot of smart people. These were a couple of young kids working on the Tide brand. And Hurricane Katrina hit. Remember that awful thing in New Orleans? And they had this idea of, we have this relationship with the Whirlpool people. Why don't we just go down and stick some washing machines on a truck and give these people a chance to go wash their clothes, because they didn't have any access to washing their clothes. And it became known as Tide Loads of Hope. It was really legitimately some 23-year-old kids who had this idea. No grand strategic thinking. Here's the data. 1,000 families did loads of wash. On average, they did 12 loads of wash because their houses, so 12,000 loads of wash in these things. A huge percentage of the population of New Orleans, so 1,000 families did their loads of wash. Tide Loads of Hope had a 92% awareness in the city of New Orleans post-Katrina. There was no advertising on this. It just the word of mouth spread, right? So it was a gift from Tide. A lot of people from New Orleans later moved away. The US government tracks them, or they did, they don't do it anymore. It's called the Katrina diaspora. And we could measure Tide's market share gains directly correlated to the Katrina diaspora. So nothing else changed. Pricing didn't change, the product didn't change, distribution didn't change, promotion didn't change. The only thing that changed was 1,000 people told hundreds of thousands of people, and those hundreds of thousands of people moved away and drove the business through this gift of altruism. Now, P&G is about to ruin this because they're going to turn this into a television commercial, last I heard, and I think it's the stupidest thing in the world. Because who wants anybody to stand up and go, look at me, aren't I altruistic? Nobody wants to hear that. So, but it's still a great example of how you use reciprocal altruism to go drive drive trust and relationships. All right, Al said there's a second way. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that they measure the Tide market share after the Katrina diaspora.
Yes.
How was the market share? I don't think we got.
As you might guess, I'm not allowed to tell you that.
Okay.
That's
curious.
But it's statistically, so Tide has around a 50 market share nationally. So if you move that by a point, percentage-wise, that doesn't sound a lot, but to go from 50 to 51% is a lot of volume.
Right.
A lot of volume.
And I don't know that you can't share that because I'm an educator, not a marketer.
Well, they're taping it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can tell stories. I just can't tell. I can't for confidentiality reasons. Okay, I said there's a second way we build trust. This interactive circle. The best in the world at this is Intuit. You guys know Intuit? They make QuickBooks, TurboTax. They have built this ecosystem of communities, forums, blogs, idea exchange, where the consumer participates in this interact, listening, and responding. And it's so unbelievable. You guys all familiar with TurboTax? So they have a community of tax experts who are paid precisely $0.0. And they're more accurate than the IRS. But they do it because they passionately believe in the brand. They are Intuit's 2%. And they are participating with the brand to answer tax questions that their other consumers are having. It's a fantastic example of doing interact, listen, and respond all throughout their system. And somebody said earlier about using the consumer to actually get new ideas. TurboTax eventually, or Intuit eventually, got rid of their R&D department. And all new ideas for improving TurboTax are coming from the community. So if you're being a CFO, where's Heather? CFO, you go, look at this, I saved all this money. But in truth, what it is really a way of enhancing the relationship with the 2%. A fantastic way to go build relationships. So, as I said, 3 areas of new work. The first was find your 2%. The second area then is you must build a relationship of trust with that 2% so that when we give them information, they trust you. That's the purpose of that. Okay? So now this gets really fun. We just covered the left-hand side of this model. And now we got to cover the right-hand side. Turns out that 100% of advocacy is tied to a cognitive psychological process called disrupted schema. Schemas are mental models of how we make the world work. They are what allow us to go process a whole bunch of information and allow our brain not to think about things. They're just assumptions we make that this is true so that I can think about other things. So I'm standing here on stage, you guys looked at me, and subconsciously you thought, okay, here's a guy, he's in a sport coat, he's not in jeans, he's got gray hair, he's older, and you just made a whole bunch of series of assumptions about me, just so that you didn't have to think about me, right? So you have millions of schemas going on. Classic example, when you drive home tomorrow, you're gonna drive on your right-hand side of the road, and the car coming at you is going to drive on their right-hand side of the road, and you're separated all by about 3 or 4 feet, going 50 or 60 miles an hour. Now, if you thought about that logically, you'd be screaming. This makes no logical sense, but your schema assumes that that person's going to stay on their side and you're going to stay on your side, and it all works. Anybody ever been to the UK? I can guarantee you with 100% accuracy that when you went to the UK, you talked about them driving on the wrong side of the road. Because it interrupts a schema, a core safety schema that we all have. And so the first time you go to something like that and you experience something that interrupts your schema, interrupts your base assumption, you have to go talk about it. And you can actually see schemas physically at play. When we go to cross the street, you're in downtown Salt Lake City, you go to cross the street, which way do you look first? Which way? Why? Because the first car that's going to kill you is going to come from that direction. So you'll look left. When you go over to the UK, God love them, they paint the sidewalk says look right, because too many Americans have been killed looking left. So you can see schemas actually impact us in our physical actions. Let me give you another example. Remember this story? The Costa Concordia? Now, to be clear, this is a schema disruption. Our schema is these things float, right? So that's a schema disruption. But I travel all over the world, and this story was talked about all over the world. And it's like, I wonder what's going on here. Because 30 people died, and it's very tragic, right? But 30 people die all the time. What happened here that caused this to be such an all over the world story? Who remembers? Yes. What's your schema about captains? That would be different than I leave the ship with my girlfriend as the first person? The drink. This shows you how deep schemas run. This is a cultural schema that is so ingrained, it doesn't matter where you go around the world. The schema, the assumption of the captain goes down with the ship is so deeply ingrained in our culture that this became a worldwide story. All because a schema got interrupted.
And I think because it's a schema that's attached to safety.
It is.
Because we all want to think that the captain of the ship or the flight is virtuous, courageous, strong, and because that's part of why we get on planes and ships.
You are exactly right. So there are schemas about love, there are schemas about safety, there are schemas about family, there are schemas about happiness, there's schemas line up along all sorts of emotional dimensions. And you have the absolute right to ask me right now, so Steve, why the hell are we talking about this? What does this have to do with what we're talking about? And the truth is, every category and every brand inside that category has hundreds of schemas attached to it. Every touch point you have with a consumer, whether it's a pricing touch point, a marketing touch point, a customer service touch point, a online touch point, has hundreds of schemas attached to it. And so that gives you a playing field to disrupt. Because remember, the consumer talks about things when their schema is disrupted. If all you do, and again, I'm missing a set of hands here. If this is expectation, a schema disruption is a variance, I can't do that, is a variance from expectation. So when you vary positively from the expectation, if you meet expectations, nobody talks about it, right? And so think how much work we spend into, we're going to meet the consumer's expectations. Well, the consumer won't talk about it because guess what you did? You met my expectations. If I positively vary from expectations, disrupt that direction, I get advocacy. If I negatively vary from expectations, I get badvocacy. I'm going to trademark that term. So the trick then is, how do we identify what the schemas are that are attached to our brand or our category? How do I actively work with consumers to go understand what their schemas are? What's their underlying assumptions? And then how do I think about how I disrupt that? Then I take that disruption and I place it in front of the 2% of people who trust me. And they go and look and say, I got to tell Barb this and Steve this and John this and Sally this, and you get organic advocacy. This is the model of advocacy that has been proven hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times over again, that this model works. So as you think about your marketing efforts, 3 areas of work. Find your 2%, build a relationship with the 2%, find the schemas and disrupt them. That's the model of advocacy. I have 15 more minutes, and I got one more subject to talk about. Before I do, though, before I move on to the last subject, questions on this model? Yes, sir.
Consumer versus dealer. Like we have a dealer we have a dealer network versus a consumer one. Granted, all humans are consumers, no matter how we look at it. But so it's a little difficult for us in marketing. You know, our ideal is a consumer goes into our dealer and says, "I want this product," because either I had an influencer tell me or I saw marketing, etc. But we still need to get those dealers to purchase the product, to have it on hand so the customer can get it. How can we, are there schemas there that we can use and disrupt in order to get them to be advocates for us?
Yes. The answer is yes. Under one precondition. Are the buyers, the dealers, human beings? If they are, then the answer is yes. So this works in a B2B environment just as well. BCG just released a report 2 days ago about a new model of B2B marketing. And you just go to the BCG website and download it. I'm sorry I didn't bring it with me. And it talks about the digital enablement of B2B marketing and where you play with that. I strongly encourage you to look at it. It doesn't talk about schemas. They're not talking about advocacy, but they are talking about this. We've done advocacy marketing in a B2B environment, and it's the exact same model. There are influencers on the B2B side. They largely see them at trade shows. You know, trade shows are a great way to identify the 2% in your community, and they may not be your dealer itself, but someone who's talking to the dealer, somebody on the outside. And then there are schemas that dealer has, and it's the identification of them. The model works identical because this has nothing to do with marketing. This has to do with how our brain works. Anything else?
We recently entered a new category. We're in the hunting space, and using that schema, we did know one particular buyer, just kind of like as the meeting expectations with this product line. And sure enough, we met the expectations, and some sales came in, and they were relatively okay. We met our expectations. But what we did is actually this year we disrupted kind of the schema by not releasing a product at our major trade show of the year, and held that back actually until midsummer, and went and met with them, and it was just an extraordinarily better product. And the sales cycle had never been really kind of disrupted that way, and he wasn't seeing it coming. So at that point, he realized that, hey, this is much, much greater than what we were talking about before, and it really disrupted a whole sales cycle. And actually, in the industry that we entered, it was a disruptive force all the way through it. So it really cost us like next to nothing, because it was the experience in doing that schema change that made it like, wow. And then actually after this buyer came across, then all the other dealers around, because he was such an advocate and such a leader in the industry. So
it's a fantastic example of a schema that exists in B2B. You know, B2B has certain purchase cycles, and we all fall in the pattern of, well, we must introduce on this cycle. And you signaled a schema disruption by saying, we're going to introduce off cycle because it's something special. That's a classic example of a schema disruption in B2B. So I want to show you this in real life. This is Red Bull. We're all familiar with Red Bull. May we all aspire someday to have the Red Bull business. A product that costs about 15 cents to manufacture and you sell for $3. But they've done a phenomenal job of utilizing this model in a very effective way. They have identified micro targets where they find their 2%. So they have micro targets for truck drivers. They have micro targets for music DJs. They have micro targets of extreme sports players. They then go out and they do acts of altruism. So they have a music DJ academy to teach music DJs to be even better music DJs. They do things with extreme sports, obviously. So they do acts of altruism to build trust in those communities. And then they do schema disruptions. So one of their key targets is 14 to 16-year-old boys. Anybody here have a 14 or has had a 14 to 16-year-old boy? So you know they're not human, right? I do. I've had 4 of them, and they're something, but they're not human. And they did a schema disruption targeted at that, where the CEO came out and said, Red Bull has a special secret ingredient that we harvest from the testicles of bulls from Pamplona. Now, to all of us here, we go, that's the stupidest thing in the world. If you're a non-human 14 to 16-year-old boy, that's about the coolest thing you've ever heard in your life. And this is just a classic example. Schemas are not your schemas. Boy, if I take one thing away from all this, when you think about schemas and schema disruptions, they are not your schemas. They are your consumers' schemas. And the hardest thing when doing schema research is to separate your own brain out and listen. And what Red Bull did here phenomenally is to understand what 14 to 16-year-old boys would talk about as a piece of disruption. Red Bull spends $50 million of measured media globally. $50 million for a brand the size of Red Bull. If you took $50 million and you threw it in the Provo River, you might hear it splash. It is nothing, just nothing. And yet Red Bull business continues to do this, and they all do it through advocacy using this kind of model. This works in real life. Okay, so here are the critical questions that I just gave you. Do you know how to find your 2%? Do you have a robust segmentation model to begin with? Then can you find your 2%? Do you know how to build a relationship? Can you do disruption? And now the last subject is, and do you know how to measure this? Because how do we measure advocacy is one of the critical questions that every CFO in the world is asking every CMO of, I'm giving you this money, which I always think is interesting. Is the CFO actually, it's their money to give, but it's another story. Sorry, Heather. I'm giving you this money and I want to see a return. The old days of I give you this money and go do your marketing magic stuff, I don't worry about it, is gone. We have to go measure advocacy. And so some work I led with BCG colleagues, we did this massive body of work across many different countries. It says 12 here. This is an old slide. We're at 27 different countries. We're over 50 different industries to go introduce a new market measurement called the Brand Advocacy Index. Anybody use Net Promoter Score? So I did too. To be clear, I did too. It's the best thing out there, right? When I was at P&G, Net Promoter Score. The problem with Net Promoter Score is it's got some fundamental flaws to it. Actually, Net Promoter Score is fantastic at measuring customer satisfaction. Fantastic. I actually don't know a better metric But it isn't particularly good at measuring advocacy. And the reason is there's an inherent structural flaw to it in that it asks intent. It asks, do you intend to advocate? And if you do, how intensely do you intend? So it's asking the consumer to predict the future. And it turns out we're all really terrible at predicting what we're going to do in the future. So there's some fundamental flaws to it. And we went to go try to correct some of those. And we've created the Brand Advocacy Index, which I'll show you here in just a moment. One of the fundamental flaws is it ranks things on a scale of 1 to 10. And there are some cultures in the world where 1 to 10 scaling doesn't make any sense. There are some cultures you simply cannot get a 10, right? I'm married to a woman of German heritage. You can't get a 10. It's not possible. It normally gets a much bigger laugh. And it's really better when she's in the room. She gets mad at me afterwards. But no, in all seriousness, in a Hispanic culture, they overrank 10s. And in a Germanic culture, they underrank 10s. So it doesn't the data doesn't transfer well across cultures. So Brand Advocacy Index, 94% correlation to growth. This just goes to show you multiple different categories. And if you want the metadata, this is what the metadata looks like. I've never seen anything like this in all my years. I've never seen a metric so tightly correlated to growth. And it goes back to how we opened this an hour ago with the statement, if you grow your advocacy, you grow your business. And that's what this data is saying to us. If you grow your advocacy, you grow your business. So what is this thing? It's a very simple survey. And it first asks the question, and these slides are all available to you, so you don't have to take massive notes on it. But there's a couple of things I want to point out to you. Like Net Promoter Score, we understood that there are advocates and there are critics, right? But there were two breakthroughs that came to us. The first was this idea that there are spontaneous and non-spontaneous advocates and critics. So a spontaneous advocate is, I walk up to you, I just meet you for the first time and go, I just bought a new car, I gotta tell you about it. This is unbelievable. That's a spontaneous advocate. Or, oh my God, I just flew in last night and this airline is just the worst airline in the entire world. That's a spontaneous critic. A non-spontaneous is, I will tell you if you ask me, right? I need to be prompted. Well, then you have to look at the weighting of that. So what you see is a non-spontaneous advocate has a weighting of 0.5, where a spontaneous critic has a weighting of a negative 2.0. So a spontaneous critic has 4 times the power in the marketplace to influence the consumer. 4 times. So sometimes the best way to increase your advocacy is to reduce your criticism. The other big breakthrough is the understanding that the marketplace is not just our customers. The consumer hears current customers and non-customers, and they aggregate that up together for a recommendation. So you must listen to both customers and non-customers. So this shows you multiple categories of the Brand Advocacy Index score, which is a differential between net advocate minus net criticism with the weightings in there. And the purpose of this is to illustrate is it's a relative number. It's not an absolute. Advocacy is a relative, not an absolute. Meaning, automotive has the highest brand advocacy index as a category. And banking has the lowest. But all you're looking to do is beat your competitor. If I'm a bank, I do not need to chase automotive. I just need to beat my competitor. And if I beat my competitor, I grow my business. So you're not chasing an absolute score, you're chasing a relative score. Let me illustrate this real quick to keep us on time. This is Brand Advocacy Index looking at a category that we all are familiar with, which is US grocery retail. And the #1 advocated grocery store in the United States, I'm going to guess not surprising anybody, is Trader Joe's. People love the Trader Joe's experience. It's a disruptive and very different experience. And guess who's growing? Trader Joe's. The least advocated is Walmart. And if you go look at Walmart same-store sales in the United States, they are flat to declining, right? So the data holds true. But if you dig a little deeper, you go, well, let's look at the number of advocates that we have here. And so on the top chart, you see Trader Joe's has a fairly high level of spontaneous and non-spontaneous advocates. And Walmart actually has quite a bit of advocates. They really aren't, they're behind, but they're not hugely behind. But look at their criticism. Their criticism is massive. And so that gives you your first clue that something else is going on. How would I spend my marketing dollars? And then we go look and we say, well, what's the difference between clients, people who currently use the brand, and non-clients? Remember, it's that aggregation that totals the marketplace. And look at what's happening with Walmart here. The people who don't shop Walmart are criticizing them like crazy. Criticizing them like crazy. So I don't know if you remember back, I said there were 6 levers of advocacy, value for money, interested in people like me, those 6 levers. Well, guess where Walmart is on value for money? Off the charts. Off the charts. Best out there. And so if I was Walmart, I wouldn't spend one more dime on value for money advocacy. One of the levers is social responsibility. Guess where Walmart is? Exactly right. So Walmart's criticism is being driven by social responsibility of you don't pay your people enough, it's a sweatshop. And if you look at what Walmart's trying to do today, they're trying to change that image because this is what the data tells you. So Brand Advocacy Index allows you to go identify the factors, because you just keep on drilling down, to go identify the factor that's influencing your brand, positively or negatively, so you know what to go work on. By the way, this is so simple to implement. You could do this in a simple survey. If you want to do it statistically significant, nationally, it might cost you $8,000 to $10,000 to go do. Most of you don't need to do it at that level. But you could do a couple hundred consumers, you could do it quarterly and get an idea of where you rank versus your competitor. It's very simple. It's publicly available information. So I'm not sharing confidential IP. Easy for you to access. One last point, and then I will get off this stage. We know from all of our research, when we aggregate everything else, that the 4 top things that are advocated are value for money, customer service, product satisfaction, and emotional connection. And the point of this slide is to say, don't neglect emotional connection. If we look at every industry, every BAI we've ever run around the world, almost 30% of the things that are advocated are about emotional connection. Almost 30%. So there's a wonderful playing ground there for you guys. So in summary of all of this, I've tried to share with you a new model of what advocacy is, finding the 2%, building a trusting relationship, keeping the disruption. And then I'm trying to passionately argue, find a way to measure it too. Because measuring it makes your CFO a lot happier. But more importantly, it gives you things that you guys can go work on. So I have 2 minutes to answer questions. Yes?
You mentioned about implementation and models. Where's a good place to go to start?
Any place. Any place. I don't care. There's a purist way to do this, and I'm tired of purism. I look at brands and say, let's just get started any place. If you want to get started on schemas, fine, let's get started on schemas. Because if nothing else, that will reveal to you some new messaging you can use. If you want to get started on finding your 2%, fine, let's get started there. This is hard work. I've tried to do this as simple as I can, but it is hard work because we don't do it today. And so you need new capabilities in your organization. You need to fail, and you need to fail fast and cheap. because you're going to run down a whole bunch of blind alleys on this. So start anywhere. Have the model in hand, but you don't need to think about it. I don't need to swallow this elephant in one bite. Start anywhere. And I don't care where you start in those 3 bodies of new work.
Just have a follow-up question to that.
Who do I look like, Sarah Sanders?
I find that in a lot of companies, selling up in your organization is just as important as selling out to your customers and your consumers. And it's often the biggest roadblocks you have as a marketer. And so any tips or recommendations as to how best to approach a sell up in your organization to get this, we're talking about creating this cult of getting behind an idea, right? And this idea is powerful. And so how do you get that translatable to those that could impact investments?
2 thoughts on that, and I agree with you, by the way. I worked for a company that spent $9 billion a year on marketing, and I was trying to get a tiny slice of that to go do advocacy marketing, and P&G was the worst customer I had. So learning to sell up. So 2 thoughts on it. 1, be disruptive. You think about what we're talking about, why people talk. Well, our CEOs are no different than anybody else. They want to hear something different. They want to hear something surprising, something disruptive. What's their schema? Put the model at play. What's their schema about marketing and disrupt it. And then the second piece of advice is when you disrupt, tell a story. Tell a story. We all get fascinated with data, and you need the data. But data's not enough. Wrap it into a story. I guarantee you that A.G. Lafley, if he was here today, he would say, yeah, I remember when Steve came to my office and he told me a story about Gilmore Girls. Remember the television show Gilmore Girls? That was our first test we ran. And we tripled the ratings on Gilmore Girls in 3 markets in the United States in a test. And he will tell you that story because it captivates him. So disrupt, but disrupt it in telling a story. And that's my best advice for you. But I agree with you, you've got to sell up on this. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I love the brand advocacy index. That's really cool. And as you were going through there, I started thinking, how do you track spontaneous versus non-spontaneous advocates?
You ask the question. Whoops, wrong direction. Sorry, I just ruined somebody's slides. So in this question, have you recommended the brand in the last X months? So you notice the difference between this and Net Promoter Score is we're not asking, do you intend? We ask, have you actually done it? Mm-hmm. And then I have recommended it spontaneously without being asked, or I've recommended it with being asked. So you actually ask the consumer the question.
Got it.
That's how it comes about.
Cool, thanks.
Yes.
Is there a way with folks that are currently advocates, whether it's pro staff or social influencers, is there a way to, are you saying survey them? Because what we're struggling with internally is growing those people that we believe are advocates and making investments in them. So I'm just trying to understand the whole sell up thing is how can I put a value on those advocates we already have?
So it's always important to go measure your influencers, your advocates. Are they doing the job for you? But I really don't care that much because I would expect them, if I'm spending money on them, I'd expect them to be advocating at a fairly high level. This is measuring their impact in the general population. It's the impact on the general population is the sell to the CEO and the CFO. Because if I'm the CEO and you're coming and talking to me of, I just spent $100,000 on 1,000 influencers, I'd go, okay, great. But what's the impact on our total market? The Brand Advocacy Index measures the total market. You're asking all customers. I have time for 2 more questions, then I got to go. Yes.
I find that when brands are running the AI surveys, that they tend to be more reactive to your marketing efforts. Because I think that's one of the challenges with NPS is it's such a lag in terms of actually seeing whether you're moving the needle with what you're doing.
Yeah, so depending on the product category, we would expect to be able to measure advocacy within 13 weeks of a marketing activity targeted advocacy. Now that changes if you're automotive where the purchase cycle is 4 to 5 years. You got to look for other, like, am I moving the brand in a consideration set? Those kinds of things. But depending on the purchase cycle, you should be able to see it relatively quickly, because think about it in your own life. If someone gives you an interesting piece of information, you don't sit on it. You know, I got my best friend John over here, and I'm not going to tell you this for 3 months. No, I'm going to tell you it now. So you should be able to read impact fairly quickly. Last question. Perfect. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, this may seem small, but I'm trying to frame this conversation up for our senior leadership. But in the very first slide on why advocacy now, I know that data was dated before Trump, before fake news, all that kind of stuff. It's a global research, but can you go back to that one real quick and just tell me, in your gut, I mean, obviously I think the 50% continues to grow, but is the company website really that much of an influence today?
This is saying that this is pretty super.
I think social media may be growing. I just love to know your gut on where you think the trend is in that particular slide, so that I can help on my narrative with my team.
This is a superficial slide. If you double click deeper and deeper and deeper on this, what this is saying is your company website performs a function in interest in browsing. So advocacy gets me into the consideration set. And then the company website is an important in the next step to move me through interest in browsing. It's a lousy place to create awareness. Lousy place to create awareness. So yeah, it's again, superficial slide. And I don't have an answer for you in the era of Trump. This is a confusing time. All right, I'd said one last question, Bill.
What we found in our category is that once, as you said, once people are exposed to an advocate or whatever, now they're considering our product for detailed information, for really understanding the specifics of the product. The website's going to be the best place to get that information, because you can be very detailed, you can be very specific, and you can deliver to them assets that they can download and take with them about the product as they're then going to the actual retail location to see it hands-on.
Thank you all for your time today. I really enjoyed it. I'm here all day, so if you want to, thank you.